Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She said it at Panera Bread, the same place we used to meet before work, when mornings still felt like a quiet promise. She stirred her coffee, eyes fixed on the foam, and said, almost casually, "You're too focused on intimacy." The word hit like a soft slap, not loud, but precise. She didn't mean physical closeness. She meant the kind that requires presence, the kind you can't fake between meetings and emails. I watched her glance at her phone, a small smile forming. A message from someone else, maybe. Or maybe just the illusion of attention she needed to survive her own reflection. I didn't argue. I just sat there, watching the steam rise between us like something dying without noise. Around us, the room buzzed, laptops opening, people talking numbers and deadlines. She thrived in that rhythm, in control, decisive. I used to admire that. Now it felt like a performance she couldn't step down from. She worked as a senior manager for a sales company downtown. Confident, sharp, always 2 steps ahead. The kind of woman people listened to before they even understood what she was saying. Lately, though, her laughter came from somewhere else. I noticed it when she mentioned a new guy from logistics, younger, eager, hanging on her every word. "He's funny," she'd said once, too casually. "Reminds me what it's like when people still try." That night, she fell asleep early. I stayed up, Hulu playing in the background, the noise filling what used to be conversation. Her phone buzzed twice. I didn't look. I didn't need to. I'm a psychologist. I read silence for a living. And hers had changed. It wasn't distance. It was control. A new kind of test. She wanted to see how long I'd try to hold something she'd already dropped. So I stopped holding. The next morning, I drove my Honda Accord past the office, straight to Best Buy. Bought a microphone, a small mixer, and a tripod. The clerk asked if I was starting a podcast. I said something like that. It wasn't about recording others anymore. It was about recording myself, before I disappeared completely. That was the day I stopped chasing her attention and started reclaiming mine. She started coming home later, with excuses that sounded professional but hollow. Client calls ran long. Traffic was insane. Had to finish reports. The same phrases on repeat, polished like scripts she'd rehearsed. I didn't question her. I just listened, the way I do with patients who aren't ready to hear themselves yet. It was a Thursday when I saw it. A name lighting up her phone screen as she set it face down on the kitchen counter. Ben, the same guy from logistics. The one who reminded her what it's like when people still try. She didn't flinch. That told me everything. People only hide what they fear losing. She poured herself a glass of wine, wearing that distant smile that said she was already somewhere else. I noticed how her tone shifted when she mentioned work, how she said, "we," now, not meaning her team, but him and her. I recognized the pattern, validation disguised as teamwork. I'd seen it in therapy rooms too many times, people trading honesty for admiration. I didn't react. That was new for her. She was used to me noticing, asking, digging deeper. But now I said nothing. Just silence. Not the cold kind, but surgical. I wanted to see what she'd do without my emotional scaffolding. She tried to bait me once, mentioning how Ben really listens. I smiled faintly and said nothing. That silence landed harder than any accusation. Control shifted, not with words, but absence. That night, she scrolled Target on her phone, filling her cart with things she didn't need. Maybe distraction, maybe guilt. I watched her reflection in the TV screen, her face lit by the glow of things she couldn't buy peace with. Hulu played in the background again. Same noise, same routine, same distance. Meanwhile, I was building something else. The podcast. Late nights turned into recordings about emotional boundaries, about how love turns into control when one person stops listening. The mic caught my calm voice, steady, detached. I wasn't trying to reach her. I was documenting my own recovery. By the end of that week, I realized something quietly devastating. She wasn't cheating on me for attention. She was cheating on the idea that someone could know her too well. And I had finally stopped trying to remind her who she used to be. The first real proof came by accident. I was closing her laptop one night after she left for work early, and a notification blinked on the screen. It wasn't explicit, just a message from Ben, sent at 6:13 a.m. Coffee later? Same place? There was a smiley face at the end. Too familiar. Too safe. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. My silence had already been collecting its own evidence. When someone stops defending their privacy, it means they've already redrawn the lines of loyalty. I shut the laptop and made breakfast like nothing happened. She texted later, saying she'd be home late again. Client dinner. The words had lost their meaning. I responded with a single thumb-up emoji. No follow-up, no question. For the first time, I felt a strange calm. She was performing, and I was no longer part of her audience. That evening, I went to Planet Fitness. The rhythm of the treadmill drowned out every thought. Step after step, I felt my focus returning, not on her, not on the situation, but on the space she no longer occupied. I wasn't running away. I was running toward the version of myself she forgot existed. When I got home, she was in bed, pretending to sleep. Her phone glowed faintly beside her, buzzing once, then twice. She didn't move. The silence between us had a pulse of its own. I took a shower, walked past her without saying a word, and sat by the window. The city lights looked indifferent, maybe they'd always been. The next morning, she tried small talk. Something about how the coffee tasted weak, how the weather was off. It was the kind of filler people use when they're testing if the wall is still standing. I answered politely, then left for work early. She didn't ask where I was going. I stopped being her comfort zone that week. The man who once analyzed every tone, every shift in her mood. He was gone. What remained was someone she couldn't predict anymore. And for the first time since she said I was too focused on intimacy, I finally understood what she meant. I had been too focused on her, not enough on myself. Disappearing doesn't always mean leaving. Sometimes it just means stepping out of the role someone built for you. That's what I did. Quietly. No fights, no accusations. Just subtraction. I stopped waiting for her messages. Stopped checking the clock when she was late. My focus shifted to my work, my clients, my podcast. The microphone had become a mirror that didn't lie. I spoke about self-worth, boundaries, the difference between patience and self-neglect. People began to listen. The comments grew, the downloads increased. I didn't tell her any of it. She found out on her own. One night, she mentioned it casually at dinner, pretending not to care. I saw your podcast is getting traction, she said, slicing her food too precisely. I nodded. No explanation, no pride, just acknowledgement. That unsettled her more than any argument could. She tried to engage again, asking about my schedule, about the gym. There was curiosity in her tone, but not connection. I answered briefly, my attention somewhere else. The control she'd once had was dissolving, not because I resisted, but because I stopped reacting. That weekend, I packed my bag early and drove to the coast for a few days. No message, no warning. Just gone. I wanted silence, real silence, the kind without strategy or tension. I stayed at a small hotel, spent mornings walking by the water, nights editing new episodes. When I got back, her face showed surprise, the kind that mixes irritation and confusion. She asked why I hadn't told her. I said calmly, "You never asked." Something shifted then. For the first time, she didn't have a response ready. She stood there, holding her phone like a prop she no longer knew how to use. That night, she stayed up late scrolling through Target again, adding random things to her cart. Candles, books, a blender. I watched from across the room, realizing how far apart we'd drifted. I hadn't disappeared. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. And in that quiet, she finally started noticing the emptiness she'd built for herself. I started noticing the cracks forming in her world, small but visible. It began at work. She came home one evening tense, shoulders tight, jaw set. She said something about a leak in the team, about how someone had reported inappropriate communication between departments. Her tone was defensive, clipped. I just nodded, stirring my tea, pretending not to see the tremor behind her control. She didn't realize yet that people notice what you try to hide. I could see the story unfolding. The whispers at her office, the questions from upper management, the subtle distance from her peers. Power has a fragile rhythm, and once it falters, the silence turns cruel. I didn't interfere. I wasn't her shield anymore. My role was done. Instead, I watched it all from the quiet safety of my new routine. Mornings at Planet Fitness. Afternoons with clients. Evenings editing the next podcast episode. Each piece of my day was deliberate, almost surgical. That week, one of her colleagues reached out to me, an old acquaintance who had once come to me for counseling. He mentioned the office tension, how people were talking. I didn't ask for details, but I knew. Her little experiment in control had turned on her. At home, she tried to maintain her old rhythm, the confident tone, the laughter that sounded slightly too sharp. But I could see her losing her audience. Her texts grew shorter, her voice lower. The glow that once filled the room when she entered was fading. She noticed me watching her one night, my expression unreadable. "You're different," she said softly. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Finally, that single word landed like a verdict. She blinked, but didn't respond. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. I went back to editing. My latest episode was about detachment as healing. I didn't have to script it. I was living it. And somewhere between the cuts and transitions, I realized the power she once used to define me had lost its grip. She wasn't the storm anymore. She was just background noise. The shift became public faster than either of us expected. It started with whispers, then turned into meetings. Her name came up in a conversation she wasn't invited to. Something about inappropriate boundaries and favoritism. I didn't need to ask how it began. The world she built on attention was starting to collapse from the inside. One evening she came home early, pale and quiet. The air felt heavy. She didn't say much, just went straight to the shower. When she came out, she sat across from me at the table and stared into her glass of water. "People talk," she said finally. Her voice cracked, but she caught it quickly. Old reflex. Control. "You really thought no one would notice?" I asked, calm, not cruel. Her head lifted slightly. I searching for something, sympathy, maybe, but I had none left to give. The silence that followed was absolute. For once, she couldn't fill it with excuses. I watched her scrolling through her phone later, searching for allies among her colleagues, old friends, anyone who would validate her version. But none did. The responses were short, polite, and distant. The spotlight she once thrived under had turned into interrogation light. That night, I went for a drive. The city looked different now, cleaner somehow. I parked by an old park bench near the water and just sat there. My phone buzzed with new podcast notifications, messages from strangers thanking me for helping them see their own patterns. Funny, the voice that used to plead for her understanding was now guiding others toward their own strength. When I came home, she was sitting in the dark. Hulu played quietly in the background, some mindless show looping without sound. She didn't look up. Her confidence, her posture, both gone. I didn't speak. I just placed my keys on the counter and walked past her. She whispered something I barely heard. "You don't even care anymore, do you?" But the truth was, I finally did. Just not about her approval. And as she sat there drowning in her own silence, I realized I didn't have to destroy her world. She was doing that all on her own. Her isolation deepened quietly. No explosions, no grand confessions, just the slow decay of relevance. The woman who once led meetings with a room full of eager faces now sat at home, scrolling through silence. Her phone, once a constant companion, barely lit up anymore. The power she drew from being needed had vanished. I moved through the house like a shadow, present but unreachable. She tried to engage, questions about dinner, about my schedule, about things that no longer mattered. My answers were polite, short, and deliberate. The balance had shifted entirely. She was now orbiting a version of me she couldn't read. Every morning, I left before sunrise, driving my car to Planet Fitness, headphones in, mind clear. The repetition of movement became therapy. The gym's cold lighting and quiet hum were a contrast to the noise we once called love. Each session stripped away a layer of dependence I hadn't realized I carried. Back home, I'd set up my microphone and record. My podcast had taken on a different tone, firmer, more grounded. I talked about emotional detachment, about rebuilding identity after giving too much. Listeners responded fast. The messages came in dozens, then hundreds. People saw strength where she once saw neglect. She noticed. One night, while I was editing, she lingered in the doorway. The glow from my laptop reflected in her eyes. She didn't speak at first. Then, almost a whisper, she said, "You're everywhere lately." I didn't look up. "I'm just consistent," I said. That silence after was heavy. She didn't know how to reach me anymore. Not through guilt, not through charm. For years, she'd been the center of every room she walked into. Now, Even inside our home, she was invisible. Later that night, I heard her crying softly in the bathroom. The sound was faint, almost unfamiliar. I didn't go to her. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. Healing doesn't mean rescuing the person who broke you. Sometimes it means letting them sit in the space they created. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Not revenge, just stillness. The confrontation didn't come as an argument. It came as a quiet evening, when she finally ran out of distractions. The air felt different, dense, waiting. I was sitting at my desk, editing another podcast episode when she appeared in the doorway, arms folded, eyes searching for something familiar. She didn't start with anger. That would have been easier. Instead, she said my name softly, almost tenderly, like she was testing if I'd still answer to it. "You're distant," she said. "You've changed." I paused the recording, turned to her. The irony almost made me smile. Finally, I said again, the same word I'd used before. This time, it carried more weight. She looked confused, maybe even hurt, though she tried to hide it. For years, I'd been the mirror that reflected her best angles, patient, attentive, endlessly available. Now, that mirror was gone, replaced by something unrecognizable, a man who no longer needed her approval to feel whole. She tried again, this time reaching for control. "You're building this audience," she said, glancing at my laptop. "But do they even know the real you?" I met her eyes. "They know the version of me you stopped listening to." That sentence ended the conversation. She turned away slowly, leaving the room without another word. I could feel the weight of her silence pressing against the walls, but I didn't follow. I went back to my work, adjusting audio levels, trimming pauses. There was something poetic about it, removing excess noise, leaving only what mattered. Later that night, I heard her moving around the kitchen, pacing. Maybe she was rehearsing something, a speech, an apology, I didn't know. But nothing came. She went to bed early, pretending to sleep again. I stayed up, recording late into the night. My voice was calm, steady, deliberate. I spoke about reclaiming peace after emotional dependency, how strength isn't found in confrontation, but in detachment. When I finished, I listened back to the recording. There was no trace of anger in my tone, no bitterness, just clarity. And that's when I realized I hadn't just changed. I'd evolved into someone she could no longer reach, not because I left, but because I finally returned to myself. Her world started collapsing in slow motion, not from scandal or betrayal, but from the silence that followed her wherever she went. People stopped laughing at her jokes in meetings. Invitations to after-work drinks disappeared. Even Ben, the younger co-worker she once flaunted as harmless admiration, began keeping his distance. She was radioactive now, and she could feel it. I watched from a distance, detached but observant. Not cruel, just clear. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was recognition, the kind that comes when life finally balances its own scales. The woman who once needed to feel above everyone was now invisible in the same rooms she once commanded. At home, she drifted through the days like a ghost. The TV played endlessly on Hulu, the same shows looping just to fill the space. Sometimes I'd catch her standing in the hallway, listening to my voice coming from the other room, the podcast she pretended not to follow. Her eyes would soften when she thought I wasn't looking. Maybe she finally understood what she'd thrown away. Not a man desperate for attention, but one who gave it freely until there was nothing left to give. One afternoon, I came home early. She was sitting at the table, her Target bags still unpacked beside her. She looked up slowly and said, "You're never here anymore." I leaned against the doorway. "I am," I said quietly. "You just stopped noticing." She tried to speak again, but the words caught somewhere between pride and regret. The silence that followed wasn't angry, it was exhausted. The kind of silence that happens when both people realize one has already left, even if they still share the same space. That night, she cried again, quietly, facing the wall. I didn't move toward her. I couldn't. Her fall wasn't something I needed to witness anymore. In therapy, I often tell patients that some lessons only arrive after the echo. And that's exactly what she was living, the echo of every time I reached out and she turned away. She was finally feeling what I had learned to live with. Only now, it was her turn to sit in the silence. The end didn't look like an ending. There was no shouting, no packed bags, no slammed doors. Just stillness. A quiet morning, sunlight cutting across the kitchen floor. She sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I could tell she hadn't slept. Her eyes had that hollow look of someone who's finally seen themselves without the illusion of control. I walked in, ready to leave for the day, my keys in hand. She didn't look up right away. Then, softly, she said, "You're really not coming back, are you?" I stopped by the door. The question wasn't about leaving the house. She meant the version of me that once revolved around her. The man who filled every silence, soothed every insecurity, carried every weight she refused to face. I met her gaze for the first time in what felt like months. "I didn't disappear," I said quietly. "I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Pride still fought to hold its ground, even as the walls around it crumbled. She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a truth too late to change. I placed my phone on the counter, the one still logged into my podcast analytics. A new notification flashed across the screen, another 1,000 followers overnight. The world was listening now, even if she never had. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. Lighter. My car waited in the driveway, the same Honda Accord that had carried me through months of quiet transformation. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, watching the house through the windshield. It wasn't resentment that I felt, it was distance. Clean, necessary distance. As I drove away, I thought about all the sessions I'd had with patients who believed closure had to come from the other person. I used to think that too. But closure doesn't come from explanation. It comes from evolution. She stayed behind in the echo of what we used to be. I kept driving, toward a life where peace didn't need permission, and love would never again mean losing myself to keep someone else comfortable. And that silence, it finally sounded like freedom. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.